How's it, my brews? I'm Beth, and I'm ticking off the teenage dream of building myself a downhill bike and riding it in Schladming. I've been building bikes for a while now, ever since me and my mate Tam built this belter of a machine back in 2011. Back in 2020, I built a bike for one of my best customers. We built Chris his gasser. I'll get more into that story a bit later on in this video. Back in the present day, I've had another gentleman from California put his name down for a gasser, and I'm taking that as an opportunity to build one for myself as well. The ultimate of dream build. Let's go. You're going to get to see all the nitty gritty, from raw tube stock welded together to a complete bike frame, and then we're going to go and ride it in Schladming with mates. I can't frickin' wait. It's going to be mint. Oh yeah, and we're going to use Cindy to machine the linkages, and I've had a bottle of rum saved up for 4 years for just the occasion. If you're here from Instagram, I'm sure I won't need to remind you to keep your fingers crossed so that she stays alive long enough for us to get through the linkage machining and have a bike for the show. Oh yeah, the show, Bespoked. We're going to be there 27th of June 2024. You better be there too. You should also do all of the liking and subscribing to help my algorithm. I need all the help I can get there. Before we get properly stuck into the build though, I'm going to fill you in on some of the backstory. In order to know where we're going, we need to know where we've been. This is a bit of a big thing for me, a bit of a teenage dream ticked off the list. Back to the very beginning then. As a team, I raced a bit of the old DH, had dreams of racing World Cups and maybe even winning the old World Champs. But I also wanted to build bikes, and I had a dream of a brand where we made the bikes in-house. Bikes like Brooklyn, Foes, Intense, Superco and Curtis. Huge inspiration. Absolutely loved what they were doing. Wanted to do it myself. I kind of figured out that I wasn't going to make it as a World Cup downhill racer. Took myself off to college to study engineering, and that's where I met Tam. I met Tam through a company called K9 Industries. You might have heard of them. I ended up flunking out of uni. We just didn't get on like I did with welding. Eventually, I found a job welding in the sheet metal shop, welding up hundreds of sheet metal boxes and grinding the weld smooth for days on end. After about 6 months of this welding job, I got a phone call from Tam. He said to me, "Are we going to start this bike company or what?" And then I figured I wanted a downhill hardtail, pure downhill race hardtail. So Tam got working on a design. Then we needed money. Sheet metal job that I was at was on £6 an hour. I was living very hand to mouth, didn't have any savings. I had to get a little bit creative. In order to get building the frames though, we needed a tube notcher and a frame fixture. I set about making the tube notcher in the old shed. I didn't make it as good as it is now straight away. Next thing we needed was a frame fixture. So I went about making one of those as well. The two bosses went away to a trade show with their machine for 2 weeks, but I wasn't actually working, was I? I was building the frame fixture. So those 2 weeks while the bosses were away, knocked out the frame fixture that we used for quite a few years. So we built that first frame and went riding, and instantly we knew we were onto a winner. That frame just rode amazingly. One thing was that it was too short for me, and I kept buzzing my nuts off the back tyre. We were onto a winner with that frame. And not long after building it, Tam moved into the shed in my garden, put his bed on a shelf in the rafters, and started building frames. Dirt Magazine were legends and featured us in a little article in the mag. We then went away and started organising a review for the old belter, and it turned out there was a race at Riola, world famous Welsh downhill track. The weekend before, we were due to drop it off at Dirt Magazine. So we went to that race, and I managed to win hardtail category by 8 seconds, and I was in the top 10 in the senior category. Pretty stoked with that. So yeah, rocked up at Dirt Magazine on the Monday after the race. Bike was hanging, still dirty, definitely not what they were expecting. They sent the frame off to Steve Butcher, and he wrote us a review. Goes round turns faster than an F1 Ferrari, I know you know. Up next came the Ranger. Enduro was just sort of taken off in the UK, and the Dudes of Hazard were putting on an event called the Dudes of Hazard Enduro in the town that Tam went to school in. Next obvious thing to do was to build an Enduro hardtail, and that was this mild steel prototype. And the main change with geometry on this frame was a much steeper head angle that had been seen on many frames at that stage. So we knew the seat angle was good, so we built one out of proper bicycle tubing, rocked up at Kinlochleven for some bicycle racing. Our first venture into full sus was the Thrasher. It was built for a friend of mine, Alvar Coppard. He was world-renowned, Alvar, for being a bike breaker. So we kind of went a bit overboard on this frame, made sure that he wasn't going to break it. Still running today. It's out there somewhere. After that came the BTR mashup. which is basically a cross between a Schwinn Straight 6 and a BTR. That was pretty sweet. Really cool little shock tunnel made out of sheet metal. While this is all going on, Tam and I are both working full time, and then we would do BTR evenings and weekends. A few years knocked on by, and then I lost my job real close to Christmas. And I messaged Andrew from the Bicycle Academy, and he said, actually, I'm thinking of offering TIG welding courses at the Academy. So why don't you come down and we'll have a chat? Seemed pretty cool, but there was no sort of definitive job on the horizon. So I managed to find a job through an agency, and then I randomly got a call from Andrew saying, I need you to come and start teaching frame building courses in 2 weeks. My other guys just left. So I handed in my notice, and during the week I would drive from Worthing to Frome, teach here during the week, stay at Andrew's house, and then drive back to Worthing and build bikes on the weekends. And this is when we started building the 2 pinner prototypes. With the experience gained from those 2 frames, the next logical step was to make a enduro full suspension frame. We didn't have the cash lying about to be building prototype frames willy-nilly, but luckily we had 2 friends that were interested in sort of like a trail enduro full suspension frame. They wanted slightly different things from it, but we built 2 sort of pinner prototypes at the same time, and they worked really well. Our mates loved them, we loved them. It felt really awesome to build them as well. The next step then was to bring out like a production version of those bikes. We had sort of plans in place to do it, but again, we didn't have the cash to front that. So the plan was to launch a Kickstarter campaign at Bespoke in 2014. We hoped to win an award which we thought would give us some credibility and a bit more exposure to the pinner launch. And we also needed a review of the bike, so we planned to then take one to Dirt Magazine and get them to do a review. We felt pretty confident going into Bespoke. You know, we hadn't really seen a bike like the pinner at Bespoke before, something that had been engineered in that way. You know, the frame had been FEA tested, the linkage had been designed and, you know, made sure that the leverage ratio was perfect. We were pretty confident going into Bespoke, and it was the first year they had a Best Mountain Bike award, so thought we had that sewn up. But unfortunately, we didn't win the award. A hardtail with a nice paint job and some internal routing won, and to be fair, we were quite annoyed about that. It felt pretty hard done by, not only because we believed that we had a really good bike that could have won an award, but also because missing out on the award, we felt like it was going to damage our Kickstarter campaign. So we took one of those pinner prototypes to Dirt Magazine, let them have a look, see what they thought. So the bike that we took to Dirt was used, a couple of years old. Like, it had a pike fork on it that was a little bit old, 26-inch wheels, 650B was just coming out at the time. And Jonesy said to us that it was no good for us to bring them a 26-inch bike with that flexi fork on the front, you know, wasn't going to do any good. So went back to the workshop. So within 2 weeks, we designed a new frame with 650B wheels and new geometry. And we managed to scrounge a bunch of components. So Doddy from MBUK at the time, Doddy, freaking legend, he lent us his personal bike that we managed to take all of the components off and put onto this pinner that we were going to take to Dirt Magazine. We knew the guys at Saddleback who were distributing Chris King and Envy at the time, and he managed to blag us a set of Chris King Envy wheels, which we were stoked on. They were like properly nice kit. And we thought we were onto a winner taking this to Dirt. I can't complain about this. Yeah, rocked up at Dirt Magazine, and Jonesy took the bike out, rode it, wrote us a review. We felt like we'd pulled it out of the bag. You know, we literally redesigned a new bike and made it, built it up into a complete bike within 2 weeks. But if I'm honest with you, that review stung like fuck. You know, we want a review of the frame. That's what we were making and trying to sell. We're not trying to sell MV wheels. The swing arm appears pretty thin, but held up okay in the test. Still would be good to see more material, even if purely on a visual level. The external cable mounts are a touch ugly and messy in days of internal routing, and the BTR logo is undersold. When in the cockpit, the BTR has a strangely sparse feel about it. Not really any surprise when the down tube is thinner than the handlebar. Berth and Tam have taken a serious look at what's going on in the trail bike sector and built it out of steel instead of aluminium or carbon. On track, it feels different, just not sure it's better. And it stung even more when a few months later Jonesy wrote a review of the Starling and absolutely loved it. It just didn't make sense, the things that he was saying about our steel bike and the things that he said about their steel bike. We hope this review from Dirt would again drum up some interest for this Kickstarter campaign and help us launch it. But unfortunately, with all the messing around and the redesign and all that sort of stuff, we missed the slot for the magazine that was going to come out in time for the Kickstarter campaign. So the review for the pinner actually came out after the campaign had ended. So not only was the review not so great, it also came out too late. So yeah, the Kickstarter ended up being a massive flop. It's quite embarrassing, to be fair. Like there's no hard and fast rules on what makes a good bike and a bad bike. And, some days taking the shit feels better than other days. So maybe we just caught him on a bad day and he didn't really like it or what. But yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow. We managed to get the pinner out on sale anyway. So as part of this old pinner launch, we needed a promo video. And a friend of mine had a good bike style and liked the way he rode. So I asked him if he'd be willing to come and ride this pinner prototype in the video. After the video, he told us that he really liked that and he wanted a downhill bike version of it. He just really liked the pinner prototype, so he asked us if we could build that for him. So that's how Gasser Mark 1 came about. Brandon raced that for 2 seasons, managed to actually crack the seat tube at one point, and he brought it back to the workshop and we did some investigations and updated our FEA, which then showed us that the seat tube was under quite a lot of stress. So we removed the existing seat tube and replaced it with a much thicker tube. That update in the FEA also influenced the pinner design. So in 2018, the pinner went through a redesign. See that the brace that goes from the seat tube goes all the way through to the down tube, and this just kind of stiffens the frame up a lot more, stiffens the seat tube up and doesn't allow it to kind of flex and move around as much as it did. Brandon then sold his Gasser on eBay. And then a kid called Billy Hoyes picked it up. He was out in Whistler and started making YouTube videos riding this bike, making loads of Instagram videos, and it was kind of free advertising for us. We were pretty stoked on it. And then a year or so later, he managed to break that frame again, snapped it at the chainstay dropout section. Also, the head tube was a bit flared. It was within the realms of repairability, but we thought it would just be better for Billy if we built him a new pinner frame. So yeah, he got one of the first updated pinner frames and he became our first fully proper sponsored rider. As part of this pinner relaunch, we had another little promo video made. We got Joel Anderson to ride the bike and Tommy C to film it. Dream combo at the time. Yeah, you watch the video and you see Joel riding the bike and you're like, flipping heck, that's insane. But to actually see that in person on a bike that I'd made, it was awesome. It was incredible. It was like dream come true kind of stuff. To see a bike that you'd made being ridden like that, so good. Day before filming though, Joel was just getting used to the bike. I was riding his bike. We were just having a little play. Ended up tearing my face open. That video did great for us. It went really, really well. And that kind of told us that we didn't really need to go to bespoke anymore. We were getting better exposure from making videos like that than we were from going to bike shows. So we kind of knocked it on the head. Didn't really bother doing bike shows anymore. So yeah, Tam and I carried on making frames for a number of years. Pinner was going okay. Hardtail frames were going okay. But it's a hard life being a frame builder. You do it for passion, not for money. It's long hours and it's hard to get paid for the amount of time that it takes to make the frames. So eventually the passion started running out for Tam, and in 2019 we decided to call it quits. You can go and read a blog on the website, End of My Era it's called, if you're interested and you want to know more about how he was feeling at the time. I decided I was going to carry on my own. I thought I'd be able to do it just fine, but it actually turned out to be insanely stressful, trying to manage the business while making the frames and learning all the stuff that Tam used to do. It was pretty hectic. And then COVID came along. So at the beginning of 2020, a customer of mine called Chris Mutlett, who already owned 4 BTR frames, got in touch with me and started asking me about the Starling and Curtis downhill frames. Chris had been asking for a number of years for Tam and I to build him a downhill frame, but it's just not worth the time and effort that you spend designing a frame to then just sell one of them. You've got to kind of spread that cost over a lot of frames to get the money back. But when Chris started asking about the Starling and Curtis frames, I knew what he was up to. He was thinking of buying one of those if I wasn't going to make one for him. So consider that my arm officially twisted. So we were planning on building him an updated version of the Gasser frame, ready for him to go on a Morzine trip with the lads it was either June or July of 2020. But that's when COVID hit. So because we were all going into lockdown and no one knew how long it was going on for, it didn't look like Chris's trip was going to happen. So I didn't make any plans to get the Gasser built. But when things started loosening up, Chris was like, the trip is on, so I had to pull my finger out and get things started. Got in touch with Tam to see if he was up for designing the bike. which was grand. So him and Chris liaised to get the geometry and stuff that Chris wanted, and then Tam designed the linkage and leverage ratio and all that kind of stuff. We were going to go for like a yoke type system to actuate the shock, but TF Tuned told us that that was damaging shocks. That yoke was putting too much stress into shocks and causing a lot of damage. So switched back to the linkage system. Reliability of my bikes is more important than them to be simple and cheap. So in order to build this bike, I needed to make a swing arm fixture. I needed to get some bend dies made so I could bend the seat tube. Obviously the linkages needed to be machined as well, and a few other bits for the swing arm I needed. There were so many delays and problems. It was insanely stressful. I was working such long hours, for the 5 weeks leading up, easily like 10, 11 o'clock finishes on the regular. And then the last week, it was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning finishes, finishing off with a 36-hour shift right at the end. And with all these things going wrong and all that stress, it just left me questioning, like, what was the point in building these frames? I charged £4,000 for the frame, and it cost me £4,000 for all the materials in order to build the frame. So I spent 5 weeks building this frame for no monetary gain whatsoever. It was super stressful. I was just like, what am I doing? What is the point? But the passion for building bikes is too strong. It was not long after the Gasser build that old Cindy came into play. I'll get properly into the story of Cindy when we get to the linkage machining video later on in this series. It's a bit of a mental story. It caused me loads of pain and misery and stress, so it should be a good story. Keep an eye out for it. And then that kind of brings us up to modern day, right? So as I mentioned earlier in the video, we've had another order for a Gasser come through, which means I can build one for myself. Fuck yeah. I've been wanting to build myself one of these frames and go ride with Chris in Schladming ever since I built his frame. So it's like 4 years in the making now. So I'm pretty freaking excited. In the next video, we can start building the old swing arm. There's a few bits that I need to make for the swing arm before we can get stuck in. Need main pivot housings, link bosses, and dropouts. So that's what's going to be in the next video. See you next week. Or maybe 2, maybe 3, who knows.